My name is Jane Wigan. I'm Events and Courses Officer at the Sussex Wildlife Trust. And this evening we are joined by Sarah Ward, who is our Marine Conservation Officer, and is going to be talking about the importance of our marine protected areas. Just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will email everyone who's joined tonight a link to the recording over the coming days so that you can watch it at your leisure. The talk is going to be around 20 minutes long with a short Q&A session at the end, and we aim to finish promptly at around 6:30. If you want to submit any questions for the Q&A, you can do so by typing in a question at the bottom of your screen. And we encourage you at the end of the webinar to remain online, as you're going to be automatically redirected to the bottom trawling consultation that Sarah will be telling you all about now. So Sarah, I hand over to you.
Thanks very much. And yeah, thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. So yeah, my name is Sarah. I am the Marine Conservation Officer at the Trust, and I'm going to be talking about marine protected areas, and I'm going to try and keep it to 20 minutes, as Jane has said. So before we start, I wanted to just show a really quick video. This video is courtesy of Sussex Underwater. They have just released this themselves as part of the campaign to try and get people involved with the consultation that Jane mentioned, that I will be talking about a little bit more detail later on. But it's just a bit of a nice scene setter to sort of get you understanding that the type of problems that we're facing, so you can understand why we're pushing really hard on this consultation and campaign. The film features the wonderful Clive Mills, who's a fisherman down in Bognor. It's just a short clip of the Sussex Underwater film, so do go on their Facebook page or Instagram and have a look at the full film if you get a chance.
I've done it, I've seen it, you know, I've done the destruction. And I was a trawlerman, so don't, you know, I'm not saying I'm the good guy, I'm not. I've done scalloping, trawling. I used to work on the big boats out of Portsmouth. I mean, we all knew what it was doing, if we're honest, but we took it for granted, and maybe we thought, it isn't me, it's not me, it's never me that's causing the damage, you know, it's everybody else. But once you put a scallop dredge in the water, we're mowing the sea, and it's frightening. But you know, then you wake up one morning and think, do you know what, we can't carry on like this. It's not about stopping fishermen, it's about sustainability for the next generation.
So Clive's definitely one of the good guys. He completely understands that what he's done in the past as a fisherman has not been, you know, it's been quite destructive, and he now is he's a real advocate for looking after our seas, particularly you know, sort of locally inshore. He runs a little fishing stall out of Bognor, so do go and get your local caught fish off Clive if you are ever in the area. So on to the main presentation. So just to give you a bit of an idea as to what I do at the Trust. I sit in the conservation policy team. So a lot of my work is around just that conservation policy, but obviously specifically marine. I do a lot towards data and evidence around that, and of course advocacy for the marine environment. And I work with a whole range of people. Most closely I work with my colleagues that also cover marine stuff in slightly different areas of the Trust. So hopefully most of you know who we are as Wildlife Trust, but in terms of our marine work, a lot of people don't know that the Wildlife Trusts actually, as a collective, we're actually the biggest marine organisation or conservation organisation in the UK and possibly Europe if we crunch the numbers the way that we want to tell the story. So we have marine staff working all the way around the country, and obviously most of those will be people that work on trusts that have a coastline, and we're all sort of trying to sing off the same song sheet, making sure that our seas, our local seas, are recovering from past decline, adapting to things like climate change, and really importantly, inspiring to all of those who want to use them. So on to marine protected areas. So we're going to start things off by just going really back to basics and thinking about what marine protected areas actually are, and why do we have them? Why do we need them? So what is an MPA, Marine Protected Area? We use lots of acronyms here. Hopefully you can keep up with those. So very, very loosely, I spend a lot of time sort of trying to explain things in terms of what the terrestrial equivalent, I suppose. So we can think of an MPA as being a little bit like a nature reserve in the sea. But the actual term Marine Protected Area, or MPA, it does actually have different definitions depending on where you are in the world. So obviously, being based in the UK, we'll stick to our UK definition, which is it's actually a catch-all term or an umbrella term for any kind of area at sea that is afforded some kind of protection. And then there's different types of MPAs that sit underneath that catch-all phrase. So why do we need them? Well, again, thinking back to nature reserves on land, we need space for nature at sea as well. And that is kind of, the underlying rationale for why they're designated in the first place, is having that space for nature to just do its thing. And by that, we mean the removal of damaging activities, so that anything that might cause harm to a particular species, that the habitat, the ecosystem is protected, the biodiversity is maintained. And then sort of further to that, we can even think about, the rebuilding of depleted fish stocks, so past declines, that can all be improved upon. So what MPAs can't do is protect against certain other anthropogenic impacts. So things like the impacts of climate change, we can't directly protect against that. But what marine protected areas can do is enhance the resilience of the ecosystem to those changes. So when we're thinking about climate change, we might be seeing more storm events, that kind of thing, or changes in temperature or heat waves. And whilst we can't actively protect against those things in their own right, having a more resilient ecosystem means that if we see some big storm events or heat waves over the summer, that the ecosystem is more resilient. It can bounce back because it's better looked after. It's more well maintained and well sustained. So I'm just going to play you a little bit of a clip from David Attenborough's recent film Ocean. Some of this is actually the same footage that you saw just at the beginning, but this just really puts it into perspective as to why we need to remove these damaging activities from these areas. So I shall let Sir David tell you more about it.
From the surface, you would have no idea that this is happening. It has remained hidden from view until now. A modern industrial bottom trawler scours the ocean floor with a chain or metal beam, forcing anything it disturbs into the net behind. It smashes its way across the seabed, destroying nearly everything in its path, often on the hunt for just a single species. Almost everything else is discarded. Over 3/4 of a trawler's catch may be thrown away. It's hard to imagine a more wasteful way to catch fish.
So I'm sure you'll agree it's a really harrowing look at a very destructive fishing method. If you haven't seen David Attenborough's Ocean, I would really implore you to watch it. It's a full-length film, but it's really, really great at just highlighting the issue. It's very harrowing, but I think for me, what really struck is it felt like a message of hope, as well as really highlighting the destruction that some of these fishing practices can cause. So yeah, obviously we've got these activities that are happening at sea. Fishing, bottom-toed fishing in particular, we're aware of the issue, and so David, like I said, has really highlighted it in his film. There's all sorts of other activities that happen at sea that can cause damage and degradation to our marine environment. which again highlights the issue of why we need to have these protected areas where these damaging activities should not be happening. So we have all sorts of things going on. Litter and pollution is a really big one that people seem to be very engaged with, particularly when we're thinking about plastic pollution. Obviously, we've mentioned climate change, overfishing and species declines associated with overfishing. A lot of these damaging things that, you know, they will be happening through the same types of activity. So overfishing, you know, we will also be getting direct damage from the fishing gear, potentially getting habitat loss, changes in the sort of species composition, which again, that's where we're thinking about that ecosystem being less resilient because we're changing the way that the you know, the food webs and that kind of thing. And what is particularly concerning is this idea of shifting baselines. So what that really means is that we actually don't have the data and evidence to really understand what these ecosystems naturally would look like before all of these damaging and destructive activities began. Just because they began such a long time ago, a lot of them, that we just weren't, you know, monitoring our oceans to the same extent we are now. And the reason that that's concerning is because we actually don't know what we should be trying to make it look like when, you know, if we are removing damaging activities, what's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And is that even achievable because of the fact that we've got, you know, climate change happening as well? So it's a really complicated picture. And obviously, marine protected areas are one way of trying to mitigate against some of these damaging activities that go on at sea. But what's really important to remember is that marine protected areas are a really essential tool. We absolutely need to have them, but they're not a silver bullet. We need to be using that in combination with other types of protective action and legislation to sort of, you know, make it a more well-rounded way of protecting our marine environment. So talking about other types of protective legislation, I was given this at a conference. I think it was actually the first year that I started at the Trust, and it's coined the Herendogram. And I'm not going to go into huge detail. I'm sure you probably can't read much of it either. But essentially what it is a diagram that covers. There's probably slightly changed by now because I started at the Trust before a lot of the Brexit stuff happened. But we've got all types of legislation here with stuff coming from the EU. We've got domestic legislation. The green ones are all primary acts of UK Parliament. So you might recognise the Marine and Coastal Access Act, the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And then we've got targets that are built into all those bits of legislation, actual methods of implementation, so what has to be done to actually meet those targets, that kind of thing. Anyway, the point here is it's incredibly complicated. There's so many different types of legislation that affect the sea, and trying to keep on top of it, particularly from a conservation point of view, is really challenging. So this is why, you know, we're really always trying to make sure that we're being that voice for nature and using these policies to our advantage and fighting for better policies to look after our marine environment. So looking on a wider scale, MPAs globally, so they're not just restricted to the UK, there's MPAs all over the world. There are, I can't see the stats because my face is in the way, but I think that says over 89,000 sites around the world. Sorry if I can't move myself. You can read the numbers. That's at least 18,000 distinct sites, which that's, you know, it's still, it looks like a relatively large amount on paper, but we have international targets of protecting 30% of land and sea by 2030. So we're still quite a way away from that. But there are some really good examples around the globe of where MPAs are doing a really good job and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is showing increased levels of biodiversity, recovering from past declines, all the things we talked about before. And then we're also even seeing the spillover effect in some places, which is where the protected areas are doing such a good job of protecting particular species that they're actually spilling over into adjacent areas and benefiting those fishing communities that can fish up to the edge of the protected area. So, you know, in the longer term, you give these protected areas enough time and they will really benefit everybody. So coming back down locally to the UK, we've got a few different types of marine protected areas. And if you sort of really put it down to basics, we've got ones that are legislated for and ones that are voluntary. And the voluntary ones, they can do just as good work as the legislated ones. And a lot of it is really just to do with community buy-in and getting people, the sea users, to really, you know, see the benefit and understand why these protected areas are in place. So the legislated ones, again, if you break it down, you've got your European marine sites, which is your SPAs and your SACs, essentially. And then you've got your marine conservation zones, which is what we're going to focus on for the rest of the talk. So if you look at this map of Sussex here, which my colleague very kindly put together for us, you can see all of the marine protected areas that we have in Sussex. These are all legislated for. The dark blue ones are our marine conservation zones. We've got a few SPAs which are sort of, you know, classed as marine SPAs. You can see those highlighted with the orange blobs. And what we've done here is we crunched a few numbers to see how much of our protected areas are actually protected against bottom trawling. So as you can see, we're not doing actually that bad in Sussex. We've got 29% approximately of the Sussex seas that are designated as MPAs, but of those, only 38% are protected against bottom-towed fishing gear. And being, you know, that's an incredibly destructive way of fishing. You know, just think back to the film we just showed. You know, we need to make sure that our protected areas are protected against that kind of activity. So what actually is a marine conservation zone? So like I said earlier, it's a specific type of MPA, but they're designated for particular reasons. So the official definition is here. It's protect a range of nationally important, rare or threatened species and habitats. And by that, it means they protect specific features. So it's not just a completely closed off area. There are particular species or habitats that are the features of it, and they are what is actually actively protected. They're considered inshore or offshore. We've got the 6 nautical mile mark. So if it's inshore, it's within that. If it's offshore, it's outside of that. And that's important because that depends who is the responsible body for looking after it. All MCZs will have varying degrees of protection and different types of prohibition depending on what it is that they're actually protecting. So some of them have got bottom tow fishing gear bans. Some of them will have seasonal restrictions. If it's like you know, a breeding fish, like in the Kingmere, we've got breeding black bream. And yeah, like it all depends exactly on what's in it, what it's protected for. So how were those sites chosen? Because they weren't just randomly placed on a map. It wasn't sort of a historical ownership thing or anything like that. It was all done through a very data and evidence-led process that was identifying areas that would benefit from protection. Bearing in mind, MCZs are a relatively recent thing. They were only created through the Marine and Coastal Access Act, which I think is 2012, putting myself on the spot there, but relatively recent. And the idea was to make sure that we had a network of sites that was a good representation of everything in the UK, not just the things that we think are nice, not just things that are commercially important, but a representation of a little bit of everything. And a whole range of stakeholders were included in that process, from fishers to sea users, to divers. So Sea Search is a program where we take volunteer recreational divers out and collect data. And the data was really important in the process of identifying and getting these sites designated. So Sea Search has been happening in Sussex since actually like the 1980s. And before we had any kind of real marine protected areas, we had what were known as marine sites of nature conservation importance, which we now call local wildlife sites. These were never statutory protected areas, but just areas that had been identified through Sea Search divers as particular areas of importance because they were, you know, biodiversity hotspots, places that were just known as being really special places by divers. Now, I'm not going to go back to the other map that shows where the MCZs now are. You have to take my word for it that a lot of these sites have actually been subsumed into those MCZs. So we were really ahead of the game, I suppose, in Sussex, because we knew where all these places were that were special and that could benefit from protection. And this is just me giving a shameless plug for Sea Search. I'm sure there's probably some of my wonderful Sea Search volunteers, divers, in this webinar. It's a brilliant program. If you are a diver, do feel free to get in touch if you think this would be something that's of interest to you. It's incredibly important data and very gratifying to be able to input that data into important programs like this. And I love being the coordinator of it. So do get in touch if that might be of interest. So what are the sites protected for? I think they probably saw there was a picture of seahorse earlier. There's another one here. So 3 of our nearshore sites are actually have seahorses as a feature. We do have seahorses in Sussex waters. The short-snouted seahorse is protected in 3 of the sites. Like I said earlier, the black sea bream is protected in the Kingmere because they use that area as a nesting site. That's the small blob in the middle, mark number 6. And then a lot of the other MCZs are protecting habitats, and they've all got quite complicated names, but I can assure you they're all equally as important to the overall functioning of our marine ecosystem. But marine protected areas can only actually do their job, they can only function if they meet all of these criteria. So they need to be big enough to actually have space for the sort of larger marine life. They need to be close enough together so that anything that's moving isn't just moving straight out of a protected area into a huge void of unprotected areas. Like I said earlier, it's got to be representative. It's got to have a bit of everything because we're talking about an entire ecosystem and a network. They've got to be numerous enough so that there's lots of them all the way around the country. And perhaps most importantly of all, they need to be actively protected. If we're just going to designate sites and then not do anything active to look after them, they may as well not bother. You call it a paper park, it doesn't mean anything at all. So when is a protected area not a protected area? Like I say, that active protection is absolutely fundamental to making a marine protected area actually do anything, actually have any benefit. So like I said earlier, in this map, we've got various different degrees of protection. And I think what's really important is 2 of these fairly large offshore sites, you'll notice have got a big red blob next to them. And that is because they don't have at present any active protection against bottom tow fishing gear. So these sites have been designated, some of them for nearly 10 years, they've been designated as protected areas. And all that time, that bottom towed fishing gear has been allowed to be dragged back and forth across them, just like in the video that we just saw. And I'm sure you can all agree that, you know, why is that allowed? It's a protected area. And unfortunately, that's just because of the fact that you can designate a site as a protected area, but the actual legislation to bring a bylaw in has to come later. But in this case, it's been way too long, and we need to get that protection in place as soon as possible. So luckily, at the moment, there is a consultation running. In my mind, like I say, I think it's still, it was too long to wait for it, but it's happening now. And that is currently open. And what that is to bring in new fisheries bylaw for 4 areas all around the English coastline, which is going to bring that protective legislation to protect against bottom-towed fishing gear in, well, certainly the MPAs that you saw in Sussex that are offshore, but all around the country as well. The different types of MPAs that exist elsewhere as well, so that we can have hopefully a fully functioning network of marine protected areas that are protected against bottom-towed fishing gear. Now it's currently in consultation. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed. So what we're really encouraging everybody to do at the moment is get involved in that consultation. Consultations are for everyone. I know they can be really difficult to navigate, particularly some of the sort of horrendous online forms where you have to sort of, you know, talk about whether you've got evidence to give and that kind of thing. But what we have done as Wildlife Trust is try to make it as simple for you as possible. So we've created an online form, call to action, which essentially allows you to fill it out almost a bit like signing a petition rather than actually having to go through the full process of the government's website with the full form. And we have pre-populated it with a response, but you can edit it as you see fit. We have been told by the powers that be at the Marine Management Organisation, who are responsible for the consultation, that every single response that's coming through this online form does count as a proper consultation response. So yeah, like I said, we've made it as simple for you as possible, and this is exactly what Jane was saying. So if you stay on the webinar until the end, when we end it, you will get automatically redirected to this website where you can fill out the form. And like I say, it's pre-populated with some information, but you can put your own thoughts in there as well. If you don't want to do it now, excuse me, just Google Wildlife Trust bottom toe fishing gear, and it will come up at the sort of top of your Google search. So that is open for another sort of couple of weeks, I think. So please, please, please do get your responses in. As you can see, I screenshotted this a few days ago. We're up to nearly 12,500 signatures on there. So it probably has tipped over by now, to be honest, because this was probably a few days ago I screenshotted it. But every response counts, and it would be brilliant if you could get involved. So just before we finish, I just wanted to end on a sort of a bit of a good news story, I suppose, just to highlight that the legislation does work. It is reality once it's in place. And this has been shown earlier this year when a French trawler was convicted for trawling in one of our offshore MPAs, the bigger one that actually does at the moment have protective legislation. So the skipper was actually fined in the end a total of £40,000, which I'm sure you'll agree is a relatively large sum of money to pay up. And whilst it's not all about the money, I don't know where that money went. I'd like to think it went into some fund for marine conservation, but who knows? But the point is, it's really precedent setting. It sets an example that, our marine conservation zones, we are going to look after them, and you can't just get away with trawling in them anyway. So yeah, just a bit of a sort of good news story, I suppose, to end on, just to show that they are meaningful once the protection is in place. So that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully I haven't overrun. And I think we've got some time for Q&A, which I'm going to let Jane sort of mediate.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to say, yes, we have gone over the, was it 12,500 mark, because I had a look earlier today.
Oh,
so things are looking
I thought you were going to
good.
say you have gone over your allotted 20
No,
minutes.
no.
That too.
No, we've got a couple of minutes and just a couple of general questions that either you or I could answer. The first one is, someone's quite interested in seeing the Oceans film. Is it on general release? It is on general release, but I'm afraid I'm not sure where.
Yeah, so you can have a look and see if there's any screenings in like local cinemas. The wildlife trusts around the country, actually, we've been trying as much as we can to put on screenings of it, because you're able to sort of get the rights to show it. So we have actually got screenings this week at the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill and a place in Worthing, I forget the name, but I've got a feeling they may both be sold out. But there are sort of various screenings going on at mostly sort of smaller venues. So just, I guess, maybe keep an eye out on local venues. And if there's anywhere that you want to see it filmed, you can always let us know, and we can see if we've got the capacity to do any more screenings.
Yeah, and I think they were interested in knowing if it's on general release online. I think you can view it on a channel, but I'm afraid I'm
on
not
Disney.
sure which one.
Yeah, Disney
on
Plus.
Disney. Lovely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then the only other question that's come in is, it says, what about the contribution from the waste that the council is dumping in the ocean? Is there any protest against that too? So are we looking at any other marine issues currently?
Yeah, there's plenty of things that are keeping us busy. I'm unclear quite when they're saying the council. I'm not quite sure exactly what that's suggesting, and like, I don't know which council we're talking about, but yeah, I mean, there's always things going on that we want to see, either stopping or being managed better to make sure that our oceans are being looked after. So yeah, keep an eye, I suppose, on our work through our website, through our social media, and you can follow on. We try and talk quite a lot about our marine work because we know people really engage with it. So yeah, our social media is the best place to follow us in terms of what we're doing at the moment.
Lovely. And I think we'll squeeze one more in. And it says, is there an argument that MPAs are good for other types of fishing, not bottom trawling, and economic growth, coastal regeneration, i.e., could fish recovery facilitate viable, sustainable fishing as well as diving pole fishing? If so, might such arguments appeal more to decision makers than, say, wildlife recovery?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and we're focusing a lot, I suppose, on the bottom toe fishing gear because of the fact that that's the focus of this current consultation, and obviously the timely manner in which Ocean was released, which really highlighted, just how destructive that can be. I think, a lot of us that are working in conservation are kind of unanimously agree that bottom-toed fishing gear is never going to be a good thing, really. You can see from that it just sort of destroys everything. But like the person who asked this question said, there are other types of fishing methods that are much less destructive and that, yeah, can certainly be sustainable. I think there's always going to be minor impacts. I think pole and line and sort of spearfishing is very, very selective, and particularly if it's done sort of recreationally and you're literally just taking what you need. There are other types of fishing we have in Sussex. You get potting, there's netting, that kind of thing. It's all going to have an impact to some degree, but mostly, we're talking much more minimal if it's managed and done in a sensible manner. And a lot of those like small scale potting fishers will sort of see the benefit from removing the other types of fishing from the area. They may still be able to operate, but they're actually seeing a benefit because of the fact that we've removed these big trawls which kind of come in and just sweep away everything, including other people's fishing gear sometimes. So yeah, we can sort of potentially move into more sustainable ways of fishing, and hopefully in the future some of those other fishing practices can be made even more sustainable, through different materials or different ways of deploying, that kind of thing. But yeah, the removal of the trawls at the moment is the main issue and the main focus.
Great. Well, I think we've run out of time. We've had a last minute flood of questions coming in. So I think what we'll do is when we send around the recording, we'll have a look at some of those questions and put in some responses in the email that goes round with the recording. Sarah, thank you very much for that and for outlining the main issues. And as we said before, please do go and have a look at the consultation afterwards, and we'll include a link to that as well in the email that we send out when we send the recording to you. So I'd just like to say good evening to everybody and thank you very much for joining us.